As we say farewell to our friend, we are reminded of his kindness, his generosity, his buoyancy of spirit.
Think of a funeral, emotions running high, tears and heartfelt words about the departed soul. But what if I add a crazy twist?
The family of a man in Brazil got the shock of a lifetime when the relative they were about to bury showed up at his own wake.
Imagine the deceased person, thought to be resting peacefully, suddenly sitting up in their coffin and casually requesting a glass of water.
The Lexington man, returning to life, lost his second battle with death early Thursday morning.
Believe it or not, this has actually happened, and not once but many times all around the world.
Now, I'm ready.
Today, I will get into some stories of individuals who defied all odds by awakening to a second chance at life, at their own funeral. Let's get started. Lberto Araujo. Back in 2012 in Alagoinhas, Brazil, something really crazy happened to a car washer named Lberto Araujo. The confusion started when another car washer who looked a lot like Lberto got killed in the town. And so naturally, Lberto's family mistakenly thought the body at the morgue was his. They went ahead with a funeral and everything, not realizing they had the wrong person. The body was even kept at Lberto's mother's house overnight. It wasn't until the wake that things got straightened out. Imagine the shock when Lberto himself showed up at the door, interrupting what was supposed to be his own funeral. The family was scared and confused. The whole funeral was in chaos. Lberto found out about the mix-up from a friend on the street. When he called someone at the wake to explain, they thought it was a prank. So, he had to go in person to prove he was alive. It turned out the family hadn't seen Lberto for a while, making the confusion worse. His brother mentioned they only meet about once a year. Lberto was just living his life in different places around Alagoinhas. Despite the bizarre mix-up, Lberto celebrated being alive with his friends and family. And by the way, Lberto's brother might want to schedule those annual family reunions a bit more frequently from now on. Kill order. In 2016, something pretty surprising happened to a lady named Noella Rukundo. She was from Burundi, but was living in Australia at that time. And guess what? She shocked her husband, Balenga Kalala, by showing up at her own funeral. Turns out this man had actually paid someone to kill her. Noella came to Australia as a refugee in 2004 and married Balenga Kalala the same year. In 2015, she went back to Burundi for her stepmother's funeral. While she was in her hotel, Kalala called her from Australia saying she should go outside for some fresh air. But it was a trick. As Noella stepped outside, a man with a gun approached her, took her in a car, and tied her up in a building in Bujumbura. That's when they told her that her husband had paid them to end her life. She was held captive for 2 days, during which they got more money from Kalala and let her go. They told her to tell other women not to stay with violent husbands. Ironic, right? Well, it gets even better. They even gave her proof, like recordings of Kalala planning the hit and money transfer receipts. When Noella got back to Melbourne, she shocked everyone by confronting Kalala at her own funeral. Guy must have thought he was seeing a ghost. She called the police, got a court order against him, and later recorded a conversation where Kalala confessed to his jealousy, explaining why he wanted her dead. He basically was under the impression that his wife would leave him for another man. In December 2015, Balenga Kalala was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Even though Noella faced challenges from some people in her community in Melbourne, she stood strong, ready to start a new life with her 8 children. Fake funeral. In 2016, a 66-year-old man in China named Zhang Deang decided to do something quite unusual. He organized his own fake funeral. Zhang, who never got married and had no children, wanted to see how many people would show up and spent 16,000 yuan to set up this mock funeral. He had done many good things in his life, but he felt like people didn't pay much attention to him. So he wanted proof that people cared about him. In Chinese culture, it's believed that the dead have similar needs to the living, and friends and family should regularly visit their graves. Zhang worried that no one would do that for him, so he decided to stage this unusual event. At the fake funeral, 40 people showed up, along with several hundred strangers who were curious about the whole thing. It seemed like a success. But Zhang wasn't entirely happy because 20 relatives and friends he invited didn't show up. He expressed his disappointment, saying, "I can't believe so many relatives and friends don't care about me. It still weighs heavy on my heart." Well, talk about taking attention-seeking to a whole new level. Maybe next time, Zhang should consider hosting a surprise birthday party instead. It might be a lot less existential crisis-inducing. 2 more weeks. In 2014, Walter Williams from Mississippi had quite an unusual experience. At the age of 78, he was declared dead on February 26th. The correct paperwork was filled out, and his body was even sent to a funeral home. However, as his body was about to be embalmed, his legs started moving, and it was noticed that he was lightly breathing. Walter was alive. This took everyone by surprise, to say the very least. An ambulance was called, and he was rushed to the hospital. Williams was released a few days later, but sadly, his reprieve was short-lived. Just over 2 weeks after this bizarre incident, he passed away for real. Walter's nephew, Eddie Hester, confirmed his passing, stating, "They came and got him again around 4:15 a.m. I think he's gone this time." The coroner, who had first declared him dead, noted that it was indeed a unique case, emphasizing that miracles can happen. Old Man's Day. The small village of Brawfing in Hertfordshire, England, has a unique and joyous tradition known as Old Man's Day. This celebration, observed on October 2nd each year, has its origins in an extraordinary event dating back to 1571. The story revolves around a local farmer named Matthew Wall. It is said that on the day of his funeral, as pallbearers were carrying his coffin to the burial site, an unexpected incident occurred. One of the pallbearers accidentally dropped the coffin, and to everyone's surprise, the sudden jolt awakened Matthew Wall. Talk about a wake-up call! It turned out that he wasn't actually dead. Matthew Wall lived for more than 2 additional decades after this unexpected awakening, finally passing away in 1595. And to this day, people in his hometown celebrate his life. You dead, mate? Back in 1896, in Lesbos, Greece, there was a bishop named Nicephorus Glycus. At the age of 80, he got sick and was declared dead by the doctor on the 3rd of the month. Following the customs of the Orthodox Church, they dressed him up in special clothes and put him in a church, exposing his body to people during the day and having priests watch over him at night. But on the second night of this corpse exposition, something weird happened. The old bishop suddenly sat up and looked around, surprised and confused by all the things related to death around him. The priests were just as shocked when the dead bishop asked them what was going on. It turned out that Glycus had fallen into a deep sleep that looked like death, and the not-so-great doctors thought he was really gone. This event, challenging the idea of life and death, was written about in the London Echo on March 3rd, 1896. Glycus's wake-up call became part of the interesting stories collected in Futility Closet, reminding us that life can bring unexpected twists. Drunk dead. Imagine drinking so much that you seem dead to other people. Well, here's a similar story for you guys. Edison Vicuna, an Ecuadorian man, goes missing for 3 days, and his friends and family are naturally worried sick. To their surprise, a body turns up, disfigured after a car accident, and everyone, including the authorities, is convinced it's Edison. A post-mortem is done, and the poor guy is officially declared deceased. Now, fast forward to the day of his funeral, the atmosphere is sad, tears are flowing, and suddenly, like a scene from a comedy show, in walks Edison, not dead, but very much alive, and well, a bit too alive. Apparently the guy was super drunk. Mourners, expecting a ghostly presence, end up screaming in a mix of horror and disbelief. The funeral, as you might guess, comes to a screeching halt. But at the end of the day, Edison, probably realizing he was attending his own wake, managed to turn what should have been a sorrowful occasion into a bizarre comedy, while the wrongly identified body was sent back to the morgue. Dead later. In Russia, a woman named Fagiliu Mukhametsyanov had a heart attack and was mistakenly declared dead by the doctors. Rushed to the local hospital, things took an unexpected twist. A few days later, there she was, not recovering in a hospital bed, but lying in her own coffin at her funeral. But here's the surprise. She wasn't actually dead. Imagine the shock when Fagiliu woke up amidst mourning relatives, realizing she was being prepared for burial. Understandably, she started screaming. Swiftly taken back to the hospital, she must have had quite the story to share. But sadly, the good news was short-lived. The shock of being mistakenly declared dead and attending her own funeral took its toll on Fagiliu. Despite efforts to save her, she lived for only an additional 12 minutes in intensive care before saying her final goodbyes. The cause of death, this time once again, was heart failure. Her devastated husband, Fagili Mukhametsyanov, expressed anger, seeking answers for the medical mix-up. But well, she was gone, so nothing was of help anyway. I'm not dead. In Syria, there was a man named Mohammed Raihan. One day, when the government dropped bombs near Damascus, a lot of people were hurt, and sadly, some didn't make it. Among them was Raihan, or so everyone thought. Everyone was sad and devastated by this young death. But here's what happened. See, after the bombing, he was buried under the rubble for a total of 36 hours. Can you imagine that? His family and friends, believing he didn't survive, went ahead and organized his funeral. The whole town was grieving. But guess what? On the last day of his own funeral, Raihan showed up covered in dirt and rubble, surprising everyone. Can you picture the shock on their faces? Life can be so surprising, even in the middle of tough times. He's alive. In Luxor, Egypt, there was a young waiter named Hamdi Hafez Al-Nubi, just 28 years old, working hard to make a living in 2012. However, one day, while on the job, he suffered a heart attack that led the hospital staff to declare him dead after their efforts to save him fell short. With heavy hearts, Hamdi's family took his lifeless body back to their village, Naga al-Siman, in the southern province of Luxor. They followed the Islamic customs and washed his body, getting ready for a funeral that was to be a solemn affair at the week's end. But life had other plans. A keen-eyed doctor responsible for signing Hamdi's death certificate noticed something unusual. Upon closer inspection, she felt warmth in his body and even detected signs of life. Hamdi was still breathing. Can you imagine the scenes there? The family members, who had already begun to accept the loss, now experienced the joy of Hamdi's unexpected return. Grief turned to happiness as the once declared departed came back to life. Hamdi's mother, initially stunned by the turn of events, regained consciousness to the incredible news. With the doctor's help, both Hamdi and his mother shifted from being devastated to happy and surrounded by friends and family who had arrived to mourn, but found themselves part of an amazing story that he could tell his grandchildren one day. Family is shocked. In Gweru, Zimbabwe, there was quite a shock at a funeral recently. Let me explain. So, the mourners were saying their final goodbyes to Brighton Damazanthe, a 34-year-old transport worker. He had been sick for a while and sadly passed away at home. No one questioned it. Pretty normal, right? The grieving family prepared for his burial and covered his body with blankets. They made arrangements to take him to a local mortuary. The funeral proceeded as expected, with friends and relatives coming to pay their respects. However, the unexpected happened the next day. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Xanthe, who had been presumed dead, started moving inside his coffin. His friends and family, in utter disbelief, scattered as he woke up right there during the farewell moments. It was a moment of joy and surprise, turning what was initially a sad occasion into one filled with amazement and relief. However, I'm certain it might have shocked someone else enough to cause quite a heart attack. Miracle from God. A 76-year-old woman named Bella Montoya surprised everyone by waking up in her coffin during the wake in Babahoyo City. In the video, medics can be seen taking care of Montoya as her family realizes she's still alive. Gilbert Balbaran, her son, shared that during the wake, held just 4 hours after being declared dead, Montoya's hand was hitting the coffin and shaking. They thought she had a serious condition called catalepsy, where the body becomes rigid and functions slow down. Because of this, the hospital mistakenly thought she had passed away, even issuing a death certificate. However, after being discovered that she was still alive, Montoya was in stable condition then, getting care at the same hospital. Balbaran was relieved and said, "My mother is on oxygen. Her heart is stable." He added that the doctor squeezed her hand and she reacted, a good sign. Balbaran called this event a miracle from God, but he's still trying to understand it. The Ministry of Health in Ecuador is looking into why a wrong death certificate was given. Well, at least Montoya's family was happy she was alive and hoping for her to get better soon. 3-year-old survived. In Mexico, a 3-year-old girl named Camila Roxana Martinez Mendoza woke up at her own funeral after doctors had declared her dead due to a stomach infection. This happened at the Salinas de Hidalgo Community Hospital in San Luis Potosi. Camila's mom, Mary Jane Mendoza, shared that the little one wasn't feeling well. She had been vomiting and had a stomachache and fever. They went to a pediatrician in their hometown, Villa de Ramos, who suggested taking Camila to the community hospital. There, she got treatment for dehydration and was given medicine. But soon after, the hospital pronounced her dead. During Camila's funeral, Mary observed a foggy glass panel over the coffin. When she shared this with others, they thought she might be seeing things and convinced her not to open the coffin. However, Mary's mother-in-law noticed Camila's eyes moving. Concerned family members checked Camila's pulse and discovered that she was indeed alive. Things got worse, and Camila's parents hurried back to the hospital. Sadly, the doctors there said she didn't make it. Mary was worried about how the hospital handled things, saying now they wanted to connect her to an IV drip. They took a long time to connect her to oxygen. They couldn't do it because they couldn't find her veins. Finally, a nurse managed it. This twist left Camila's family and the community puzzled about what really happened at the hospital. It's a strange and confusing situation that has everyone wondering how there could be such a mix-up. Imagine if they never noticed that the kid was actually alive. 20-year-old was alive. In India, something really weird happened during a funeral in Lucknow. A 20-year-old man named Mohammed Furkan, who had been unconscious since an accident on June 21st, was declared dead by doctors. The family, unable to afford his medical bills, informed a private hospital of their financial constraints. On Monday, the grave was ready, and the family gathered for the burial, believing Furkan had passed away. To everyone's surprise, just before the burial, Furkan started to move. Mourners were shocked to see their supposedly deceased loved one showing signs of life. Quickly, he was rushed back to the hospital and placed on a ventilator. This has raised questions about the healthcare system in India, leading to an investigation in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Muhammad Irfan, Furkan's older brother, shared the emotional roller coaster the family experienced, saying, "Devastated, we were preparing for the burial when some of us saw movement in his limbs. We immediately took Furkan to the Ram Manohar Lohia hospital, where the doctors said he was alive and have put him on ventilator support. We had paid to the private hospital earlier, and when we told them that we had run out of money, they had declared Furkan dead." Narendra Agarwal, the chief medical officer in Lucknow, assured that the incident would be thoroughly investigated, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. Declared deceased baby started crying. Next up, we have a story from China, The story is about a baby who was declared dead and was supposed to be cremated. However, something surprising happened at the funeral home in Hes last November. The baby started crying. Just 2 days before, authorities had issued a death certificate for the baby, who was less than a month old. The little one had been dealing with breathing problems since birth, and the parents had agreed to stop his treatment. But when the baby showed signs of life at the funeral home, everyone was amazed. The family acted quickly, and the baby was rushed back for emergency care. Life really knows how to throw us some curveballs, doesn't it? Can I have some water? In Brazil, there was a little boy named Kelvin Santos, just 2 years old, who doctors thought had passed away due to pneumonia. His family was devastated, and they were getting ready for his funeral. But here's the strange part. Right before his funeral, Kelvin did something unbelievable. He sat up in his coffin and asked for a glass of water. Everyone was so shocked. He even smiled, looked around, and took a sip of water. But after that, he laid back down and didn't move again. His dad, Antonio Santos, tried to wake him up, but it didn't work. Antonio rushed Kelvin to the hospital, but even the doctors there were puzzled about what had happened. They checked and said, yes, Kelvin was really gone. It's a mystery that still leaves people wondering what might have occurred that day. Late to the party. Imagine the shock when a missing person case takes an unexpected turn. This story is about Sherilyn Jackson, a 50-year-old woman from West Philadelphia who went missing from her home. The situation got worse when the police discovered a body they believed to be hers. With 2 of her children identifying the remains, the authorities declared Jackson deceased, and she was pronounced dead. An obituary was published in the local paper, and a funeral service was held to bid farewell to the presumed departed. Just how it's done regularly. However, there was a significant hiccup in this story. The body in the casket was not actually Sherilyn Jackson's. But who was it then? The real surprise came 2 weeks later when Jackson was found alive and well in a mental health facility. She had been unaware of the confusion surrounding her supposed demise and was understandably surprised to read her obituary. Well, that must have been traumatizing, to say the least. Imagine having to explain that you are alive and people start running, scared for their lives. Lost and found case. Imagine thinking your daughter was gone forever, dead in a tragic house fire. That's what the Vera family believed in 1997, when their 10-day-old daughter seemingly burned in the flames. However, life had an incredible twist in store for them, which you wouldn't expect at all. 6 years later, at a birthday party, Delimar's mother, Luz Cuevas, spotted a girl who looked just like her own children. Acting on a hunch, she pulled off a clever move. Pretending to help the girl with gum in her hair, she collected a strand for testing. Yes, DNA testing. The results were beyond belief. The girl was actually Delimar, or had her DNA. But how does that even happen? Here's what happened. A lady named Carolyn Correa was the perpetrator. She started the fire and took the baby, pretending the baby was hers, while everyone was busy with the fire. When the police had proof after the DNA test, they went to talk to Carolyn, but she ran away and left her other kids behind. You can imagine the reunion. It was all tears, but this time, happy ones. Don't poke me. Carlos Camejo, a 33-year-old guy from Venezuela, had a seriously wild experience. And even thinking about it makes my skin crawl. He got in a bad accident on the highway, and everyone thought he was dead. So, off to the morgue he went. Pretty normal, right? Well, no, not really. Now this is where it gets crazy. The doctors at the morgue started doing an autopsy on him, thinking he was dead. Just how they go about their day. But suddenly Carlos wakes up in unbearable pain. Can you imagine that? Doctors were literally about to cut him open. His poor wife, thinking he was really gone, came to the morgue to identify his body. Surprise, surprise. Instead of finding her husband lying on a cold slab, she discovered him in a corridor, very much alive. It's time to doze off. Some people like to sleep, and they do sleep like a dead body. But this one story is crazier than any story that you have heard before. A 91-year-old woman in Poland was declared dead by a doctor. Her family, devastated by the loss, started making arrangements for a funeral. During this time, the woman spent 11 hours in a cold storage place. Now, what's surprising is that the people working there finally noticed her bag was moving, so they quickly opened it up, and guess what? She was alive. When they asked her how she felt, she just said, "Normal? Fine." Can you believe it? After this crazy experience, she went back home and warmed herself up with pancakes and soup. And there you have it. Some truly astonishing tales of individuals defying the odds and waking up at their own funerals. Can you wrap your mind around it? If you found these stories as mind-boggling as I did, don't forget to show your appreciation by giving a thumbs up, commenting about your favorite resurrection, and hitting that subscribe button for more fascinating tales. See you in the next one.